but there's real science there, obviously, and there's the ability to adopt some better practices in order to be in a house where perhaps I don't need to put a jersey on in the middle of winter, or my kids aren't getting sick all of the time and I'm not taking time off, or I don't get up every morning and have to get a little squeegee out and wipe the condensation down from the inside. Or when I take my shoes out of the cupboard at the end of winter, they're not covered in mold because my house isn't breathing properly. So I think it's just being critical about what we do, applying some science, applying some analysis, and realizing that what we've done actually hasn't produced us that great a result. And I say that as the proud owner of a 120-year-old wooden box, right? And people will often say, oh, new houses are not as good as old houses. And there's lots of things that I really, really love about this villa. I love its heritage. I love its history. I love the craftsmanship that was involved in it. Does it perform? No, not particularly well. Have I had to do a lot of work to try and get it to be even slightly better than it was? Yes. Could I do more? Yes. Will it be much better? Maybe. Do I have the resources to do that? Maybe, maybe not. So that, that's the dilemma. I think it's just that dilemma.
Welcome to the Smart Living Spaces vlog. I am Sharon, architectural and passive house designer. I'm also a Homestar professional located here in New Zealand. It's my mission to make healthy, comfortable, energy efficient and affordable homes for everyday people. So come on a journey with me where I share my knowledge gained over the last couple of decades, because we aren't going to be building better if people don't understand and see the value in changing what we are creating. So hi everyone, I have Peter Wolfkamp with me today, and Peter is a residential builder. So most people will know your name and they would have thought, oh, I've heard that somewhere before. You hosted the really popular TV series, The Block. So firstly, you've been building for a while. What got you into building in the first place, Peter?
Hey, Sharon, lovely to chat with you. I was thinking about this the other day. I think it's actually that I come from what I describe as a family of makers. So Dad, as a metal worker, had his own business. My mum as a seamstress. So mum, business owner, seamstress, and that sort of thing. So our house was kind of, people were always making things. And I think that's impacted all of us, or myself and all of my siblings. And so after school and after doing a couple of years of actually youth work, I ended up building with the father of some friends of mine to build their family home. And I think that had, reflecting back on it, quite an impact on me as well. So building wasn't just about building, it was about creating a home for a family.
So you had that people focus, especially from the youth work that you were doing too.
Yeah,
so that's an interesting combination.
And I think too, enormously grateful for Tom, who was my first boss, because he, like my family, is Dutch heritage, and they had come with a whole lot of attitudes towards the trades that, let's say, Western Europeans hold, or Europeans in general do, where it's seen as honourable, it's got a tradition, you've got a standing, and so on. And I think sometimes we do have some issues in terms of how we represent the trades in New Zealand. So he didn't have that baggage, and neither do I, in the sense that it's important work. It's got to be intellectual. It's got to be rigorous. You've got to think about what you do. There is a highly technical element to what you do. It's not just bashing frames.
Okay. Yes. So let's talk about The Block, because New Zealanders have got this real DIY appetite, right? And this number 8 wire mentality. Like you, I don't come from New Zealand originally, so it's something that is quite apparent to me. What was your biggest takeaway from the DIY culture that you saw on The Block? Because you would have been having to educate some people on what not to do. I think I can remember a few episodes.
Yeah, I mean, look, in a sense, there's a tremendous tension in The Block in terms of my role as it. So as the site foreman, as I'm an LBP, and I have been for a number of years. So part of my role is to do all of the compliance. I manage all of the inspections. At the end of the job, I do all the paperwork required to get a CCC. And so while we obviously have the contestants and we need them to do as much as possible, all of the restricted building work as required under the Act is done by LBPs, all of it signed off, engineers, producer statements, et cetera, et cetera. I think what I probably enjoyed the most about working with the contestants is the creativity. Because, you know, we can often, if we're in the game, right, we think we've seen everything. And yet week by week, season by season, people would come along and go, I want to do this. And I'm often thinking, I've never seen that before, wouldn't have thought of doing that myself. It's a great idea. Go for your life.
Great. Well, that kind of keys into your upbringing with creation, you know, creatives with your mum and your dad too. So yeah, and thinking outside the box. So how we've talked about building better and building healthier, and obviously we share a real desire around homes and people and having that focus on both of those things together. How do you think average Kiwis look at health and comfort in their homes? Because you've dived into the space, not just as a student of it, but also you're an educator in it, and certainly you're an educator on the block too, in a way. What's the biggest story or misconception maybe that society has that we should be challenging or changing or speaking to?
There's a sort of delightful dichotomy with how we approach housing, right? At its most basic level, housing is shelter. It's a roof, it's some walls. Hopefully most of the rain stays on the outside. Hopefully most of the cold stays on the outside. Hopefully it stays up long enough for us to inhabit it. And that's kind of that's our common experience, right? Housing is shelter. And then we've got that model in our minds that, and look, on the radio show at ZB, if I talk about increasing insulation, I will get a text or a phone call just telling me to harden up, put another jersey on, right? Often, maybe less so now, but it's not uncommon. So I think in our minds, we've got a vision that our houses are just shelter. And then we meet a whole bunch of people who are talking really, really complicated stuff, right? And suddenly, why should I be bothered about interstitial moisture control? What the hell is that? What's it going to do in my life? But there's real science there, obviously, and there's the ability to adopt some better practices in order to be in a house where perhaps I don't need to put a jersey on in the middle of winter, or my kids aren't getting sick all of the time and I'm not taking time off, or I don't get up every morning and have to get a little squeegee out and wipe the condensation down from the inside, or when I take my shoes out of the cupboard at the end of winter, they're not covered in mold because my house isn't breathing properly. So I think it's just being critical about what we do, applying some science, applying some analysis, and realizing that what we've done actually hasn't produced us that great a result. And I say that as the proud owner of a 120-year-old wooden box, right? And people will often say, oh, new houses are not as good as old houses. And there's lots of things that I really, really love about this villa. I love its heritage. I love its history. I love the craftsmanship that was involved in it. Does it perform? No, not particularly well. Have I had to do a lot of work to try and get it to be even slightly better than it was? Yes. Could I do more? Yes. Will it be much better? Maybe. Do I have the resources to do that? Maybe, maybe not. So that, that's the dilemma. I think it is. It's just that dilemma. House is shelter. House is performance. How do we get those two to mesh?
How together? It sounds like there's this. Well, I know this, but the way that you've explained it is this big grey area between what we're expecting out of our homes, and then how we actually view our homes.
Yes, but I think also. By nature, I'm an optimist, right? And so what I have seen in the last almost 40 years is that where we didn't have many exemplars of what it might be like to live in a house that performs better, we're starting to see it. and that has shifted the dial, or it's opened people's eyes to the fact that maybe if I go to my friend's house and it's cold and miserable outside, I can be comfortable in their house. And when I go back to my own, I'm not. What's the difference? Well, the difference is all of that science, all of that innovation that might have gone into that house that I don't have. Therefore, it is achievable if I put the time and effort into it, and money, obviously.
Yes, and I think it's also understanding who to go to and what questions to ask too, because what you and I do, most people don't understand on any level of depth. Somebody says, I'm just going to a builder to build my house.
Sure.
It's just about picking up a hammer. You're like, actually, there's a lot more to it. But unless you're actually in the arena, as I say, you probably think it's quite simple. It's easy to look in from the outside in, thinking it's simple, which is.
And again, one of the things that I really celebrate, and this is in the radio show and when I'm engaging, home shows and events and that sort of thing, is quite genuinely, I think when I kind of really got into this probably 10, 15 years ago, if you went and talked about something as relatively simple, it's not, but let's call it simple, thermal envelope, right? And the concept of creating a thermal envelope for your house. I think I'd do a presentation, let's say, to general public, and there'd be one or two people that would nod and they'd understand kind of what we're talking about. Today, that number is much greater. So in terms of building literacy, I think that thankfully more and more people are being critical, doing a little bit of learning, and understand more about what they can expect from their houses. So there's reason to be optimistic, I think.
Okay, that's always good to hear.
Isn't it?
It is. I think social media and people like you and I talking about it goes a long way.
Sure.
You live in an older home, as you said, and you've done a renovation journey side by side, just like many New Zealanders. If you had a magic wand, because we all have cost, we all have wallets, and we all have limits on how much we can spend on our homes just by practicality in life. What would be the one thing that you would change about your villa? Because you love the character of it, obviously, but what would be the one thing you would change? Is there just one, Peter?
Shivers. I mean,
sorry, curly.
No. It's a really good question, because you got to think that, like, I was working on a property a little while ago. It was a 1967 brick and tile 2-bedroom unit, right? There are tens of thousands of them around. So concrete tile roof, concrete, timber joinery, timber framing, strip flooring. And I had to pull out the bathroom because it was old and rotten. And I can remember being inside the house, pulling the lining off, staring at the timber framing, no building paper, no insulation, certainly, just looking at the back of the brickwork, right? Thinking, wow, for the people who live in this property, from inside to outside, there's some bricks, there's a bit of air, there's a bit of timber, and there's 10 millimeters of plasterboard. That's it between you and the outside world. And this is the reality for tens of thousands of New Zealand houses. It's a long-winded way of saying, I think if I had have approached our renovations back then in the same, with the knowledge that I might have today, I probably would have gone harder earlier in terms of going, maybe I would spend a bit more money and strip off all of the interior lining so that I can get building paper against the back of the weatherboard or damp mat or something like that. Because it is possible. I've been following a project that a mate of mine is doing. He's an excellent carpenter. They've taken a 1950s house, added an extension, changed the joinery, a lot of work, but they're down at like 0.56 air exchanges now in a 1950s house. I mean, that's like mind-blowing, right?
Yes.
So it can be done. I suppose the other thing is, I think we've got a real challenge in terms of heritage. Like, you can do deep retrofits. Is that cost effective? That's going to be a real challenge for us all going forward. And I'm a fierce defender of heritage and a need to keep some of our built environment. But I'm conflicted in saying that I also realise how poorly performing many of those buildings are.
Well, I have a 1940s state house, heritage,
Yep.
it is now. But when it was in such a bad condition when I bought it that it needed an upgrade, kitchen and bathroom, the
Sure.
whole is 60 square meters, it needed some love. It was really not healthy. But I ripped off all the wall linings and did it
Yep.
because it was a substantial renovation. I guess the challenge is if you're not doing a massive renovation, taking off those wall linings, stapling in building paper,
Yeah.
and then putting insulation in is not always. And the challenge that I see with some clients is that if you're wanting to do it piecemeal, room by room, particularly with walls, you need a building consent, you need bracing.
Yeah.
It becomes quite problematic. So yeah, that is quite a challenge. The wall ceiling and roof's a little bit easier, but
Yeah. With
mm,
access. Yeah. But
so
I've also seen really good examples where people have, I guess, it's one of those things you kind of know that you're going to have to spend the money eventually. So if you can spend it all in one hit, and there's a tremendous effectiveness and efficiency of approaching it that way. And I've seen a really good example, family member who had sort of a 1950s weatherboard and concrete tile roof, and just ripped in there, got rid of all of the lining, did the retrofit of the insulation really well, popped out the timber sashes and replaced them with high performance UPVC. Got the double glazing, got the new hardware, doesn't have to paint them. So when you look at that versus all of the time that I've spent taking double hung sashes apart and scraping them down and replacing the cords and taking the holding bead out and putting in a brush seal and putting them all back together again, I love that work. But I have to say, every now and then I think, shivers, if I was charging a client for this time, how would I feel? It's me doing it for me and my family. But these things can get cost prohibitive, and I think that's a real challenge.
yeah, 100%. So what were the top 5 things that you would want to put in a new home?
Wow. Oh, fantastic question. I think, joinery that really performs well. I think we've come to understand that the combination of the glazing and of the joinery, if you get that right, it has a significant impact. So I would probably talk about joinery. I think there's some tremendous innovation about construction methodology. I lost count of the number of houses that I've done with stick framing. There's there's muscle memory in me that goes, there is nothing that I enjoy more than taking a packet of timber, cutting top plates, cutting studs, cutting nogs, nailing it together and standing up a wall. But we also, through learning, we also understand that, in some cases we're ending up with walls that have got like 46% timber, right? I love timber. It's not a tremendous insulator. So we've got some challenges there. So I'd look at sort of innovative wall framing, maybe something like SIPS panels and other systems. I had the opportunity of going to Brands earlier in the year and looked at a little model house that they've got where they've taken what is basically a really bog standard 1970s house and they're making changes to it and measuring the impact. Wow. And what they found in that initial sort of the first thing they did seemingly is create a warm roof.
Right. Yes. Okay.
And not inexpensive, but the performance gain has been significant, right? And the innovation around it. So imagine having a conditioned roof space where if you've got ducting and wiring and downlights, it doesn't impact on the overall performance because all your insulation is above that. So, maybe I'd look at warm roof. I'd certainly think heavily about like durability of cladding. Do we get a cladding that requires a tremendous amount of maintenance and care? Or could I look at a cladding perhaps that requires less? Whoever came up with maintenance-free home, that was a terrible thing and it's put people off on a terrible journey. Everything requires maintenance, but we should consider how much maintenance over a period of time and durability. And then possibly, I guess I'd probably look, the other thing that I would do is I'd want to build in such a way that is not as tremendously wasteful as the way we build now. As a sector, as individual practitioners, we need to do so much better. That it is a unbelievable embarrassment about how much the construction sector adds to waste in New Zealand.
I heard 60% of landfill
Yeah, yeah,
is
those
and
are the
it's
things.
and a fair amount of that would be virgin material too. So it's
100%.
yeah.
100%. And again, I'm really grateful, I guess, to my folks. I'm really grateful to my first boss who always had that approach of efficiency. In the end, if you're throwing out a whole lot of forward at the end of the job, well, you paid for it, right? Or once you've finished doing your lining, you've got a whole pile of plasterboard that's going to landfill. You paid for that, right? That's all waste, and it's all cost, and it's all inefficiency. So I think I pretty much had that driven into me as a young tradesperson is to look after your ordering, make sure you're not over ordering because you can't be bothered doing the analysis, and then think about where those materials are going and what your waste is going to be. And then inevitably, when we have waste, what are you going to do with it, given that? And I sit on a board of a local not-for-profit that administers our local resource recovery centre. So, we're getting from a skip that might come from a construction site, we're diverting 80%, right?
Wow.
It's achievable. So
Yeah.
I think for all of us involved in the construction sector, we need to be focused on waste. So that would be my number 5 element, which isn't actually part of the building at all, but it is.
But it is,
Yeah,
yes, it is, because it's not just seeing things in isolation, isn't it? It's understanding the context in
100%.
which it sits. Now, you do a lot of things, Peter. You have a radio show
Sure.
and you're on TV and you're at trade shows. Tell us a little bit about what you've been up to and what you're currently working on.
Um, this year, I've promised that I would spend a bit more time working on the house. It's an old house. What do old houses need? Constant maintenance, right? So I'm trying to set aside a reasonable amount of time to complete some of those tasks. And the other thing is, like, it is my first love in the sense, in terms of trade and practice. I genuinely am in my happy space working away on something. And we did a project a couple of years ago, and it's a mad rush to do the project. You've got subcontractors. I had labor only guys helping me out. I got this whole responsibility to bring the whole thing in. And then on a Saturday afternoon, I'm sort of there on my own doing scribers, thinking, I'm loving this. Like, I just love this. So I still am doing that. Look, like I mentioned, I'm active with the local resource recovery centre. I'm involved in local school as a board of trustees member. There's a lot going on. You're right.
There's a lot going on, yes. And do you want to just speak a little bit about your radio show that you do?
Yeah, thank you. This is interesting. I first started. Actually, it was a little 15-minute segment with Danny Watson, and I think it was scarily enough, about 25 years ago. And so on a Wednesday afternoon, I would just get on the radio, chat with him, and take calls from the public about squeaky floorboards, basically. And so about 11 years ago now, we went to News Talk ZB with a proposal for a show that would be focused on building, DIY, home renovation, new builds, and they took the bait. And so 11 years on, every Sunday morning, now from 6 in the morning until 9 in the morning, we get to talk about building. And I've in a sense that we've kind of broadened it out. Like I love the dialogue. I love the fact that people can ring up and they can ask me pretty much anything about building. But also, building is more than just squeaky floorboards. So we're taking opportunity. Actually, last week on the show, Chris Pink, the Minister for Building and Construction, came into the studio. We had an hour to talk about changes to legislation. There are significant changes in terms of the Building Act, in terms of joint and several liability and moving to proportional liability, 70 square metre standalone dwellings that we might be able to build without a building consent, changes to the LBP scheme. There's so much going on. So, the show is also a platform to look at some of those wider legislative changes, changes in how we build, innovation, and so on. So hopefully it's a nice mix. And then, of course, we always end with the gardening, which is fabulous with Ruud. So, but that opportunity to engage with people and talk about where they're at and what they'd like to achieve, how they see building, it's also kind of daunting. There's so many products out there, right? So as a consumer, as a homeowner, how do you know which tube of silicone to buy? So yeah, it's a really nice broad range, and I love chatting with people on a Sunday morning.
Sounds like your demographic is not just industry professionals, but also just general public, just people who live in homes.
Yeah, and I guess that's the thing. Like, with housing, like if we think about things that are common to all of us, housing would have to be one of the most common. You might enjoy watching rugby. I might enjoy watching football, those sorts of things. But ultimately, we're either homeowners or we're renters or we're unhomed, in which case housing still has an impact on us, right?
Yeah.
But it is one of the very few things in which we all have some commonality.
Commonality. Yes. Yes. Now, Peter, how do people find you? How do they connect with you if they want to?
Yeah, sure. Hey, look, you can call on Sunday, but look, I do have a website, so just residentbuilder.co.nz. Starting to do a little bit of stuff on social media. So there's YouTube. If you search just for Peter Wolfkamp or for Resident Builder, you'll find it there. We've got some projects that we've done. I've got a bunch of companies that I work with, so we're talking a little bit about their stories. So, in terms of sustainability, better design, better products, and so on. Got some links there. And I'm out and about a fair amount, so I'm often at home and garden shows around the country. Not that it's relevant, but I'll be on a plane to Nelson on Saturday to go down there. So I'm around, basically.
Yeah. Are you at LinkedIn, TikTok,
Yeah.
Instagram,
I haven't done a lot on
Facebook?
LinkedIn. I must get onto that. They tell me no, it is good, and but I'll start to update and share some more information there as well. So yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
I do see your posts about being at home shows and you did a Stark tour, which is fantastic because it's just shining a little bit of a light.
And I again, the companies that we do partner with, I really enjoy working with them. And because ultimately we're all wanting people to be able to live either more comfortably, more sustainably, and with a better quality. I think that one of the things that we've probably both started to realize is that poor quality housing has tremendous impacts on our society, on individuals, on children, on educational achievement, on outcomes in life, and so on. So, making better buildings is something that's good for all of us.
100%. And not just the ones that build them, but for the future occupants who would never, ever know.
Of course.
Yeah. I so appreciate your time, Peter. Thank you for
Lovely
chatting with me.
talking with you, and thank you for the work that you do in terms of shining a light on some really important issues, about introducing a whole bunch of people to some really important detail and information about something that we both love, which is houses, and something that we both hope for, which is better houses.
Better houses. Yes.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, everyone.